Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're tackling a real psychological head-scratcher. How is it possible that jealousy, one of the most gut-wrenching, painful emotions we can feel, can be flipped on its head and turned into a source of, well, intense pleasure? It sounds impossible, right? But we're going to dive into the science that makes this transformation happen.
Okay, so here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll tackle that big jealousy paradox head-on. Then we'll get into the neuroscience, how the brain literally rewires itself, and even take a look at our evolutionary past. After that, we'll explore the magic trick of turning pain into pleasure, and we'll finish up by talking about the all-important difference between fantasy and reality.
All right, first up, the central puzzle. This is the part that, on the surface, just makes no sense at all. So here it is, the big question. How can something as awful as jealousy actually become a turn-on? Think about it. When jealousy just happens to you, it feels like a threat, right? It's all about fear and loss. But when it's something you choose to experience, well, that changes everything. And the answer, surprisingly, doesn't start with our complicated minds, but with something much more basic, the simple wiring of our bodies.
I mean, just look at this. Heart pounding, adrenaline pumping, laser focus. Sound familiar? That's because physiologically, the way your body reacts to a threat is almost indistinguishable from how it reacts to sexual arousal. It's the exact same set of physical responses. It's like the body's hardware is the same, but the software, the meaning we give it, is completely different. So, what's the magic button that flips the switch from, oh no, this is a threat, to, wow, this is exciting? It all boils down to one simple, powerful concept: control, or agency. When you choose to feel this, you're no longer the victim of the emotion. You're the one in the driver's seat. You're the one directing the show. Okay, so we've got the body's response. Now let's get into the really cool stuff. What's actually happening inside the brain? How does this psychological flip work on a neurological level? It's a pretty amazing process of adaptation, actually. There's this psychological concept called opponent process theory, and it explains this perfectly. Think of your brain like a thermostat, always trying to keep your emotional temperature stable. When it feels a blast of cold, that sting of jealousy, it cranks up the heat to compensate. It releases this powerful, positive counter-response. But here's the wild part. With repeated exposure, the brain gets really good at this. It starts cranking up the heat before the cold even hits, and eventually that warm, positive rush becomes stronger than the initial negative feeling. It literally hijacks the experience. And here's where it gets even crazier. The parts of your brain that process emotional pain, like the anterior cingulate cortex, are basically next-door neighbors to the parts that process pleasure, like the insula. They share the same neural zip code. And because they're so close, the brain can build a superhighway between them. It learns to associate one with the other, until the signal for pain can actually trigger a flood of pleasure. All right, let's switch gears for a second and jump in a time machine. We're going way, way back, because it turns out our deep, ancient evolutionary programming might have a whole lot to do with all of this. It's a theory called the sperm competition hypothesis, and it goes like this. For our ancient ancestors, the biggest threat to a male's genetic legacy was another male. So evolution cooked up a pretty potent response. The mere risk of competition triggered a massive spike in arousal to, increase the chances of his own success. Fast forward to today, and that ancient primal circuit is still there. In a safe, consensual context, it can be triggered not for survival, but for a very, very intense kind of pleasure. Okay, this next part is maybe the trickiest piece of the whole puzzle to wrap your head around. How on earth can something like humiliation become a source of pleasure? Well, you've heard of a runner's high, right? That feeling of euphoria you get after pushing your body through pain. This is the psychological equivalent. When the brain experiences emotional distress, but in a controlled way, it does something amazing. It floods your system with endorphins, your body's very own natural opioids. And that rush, well, it can feel incredibly euphoric. Right, but why humiliation specifically? It's a totally fair question. And the answer is so interesting because it's the complete opposite of what you'd expect. It actually flips our whole understanding of self-esteem upside down. See, you might think someone who enjoys this must have low self-esteem, but the research shows the exact opposite is true. You need to have really high self-esteem. You have to be so secure in who you are that you can play with feelings of degradation without it ever touching your core sense of self. It's like an actor playing a role. You know it's not real, and that's what makes it safe to explore. And there's another layer to this, a concept called escaping the self. I mean, think about your daily life.
It's a constant grind of making decisions, managing your reputation, thinking about what other people think. It's exhausting. The appeal here is the chance to just let go of all of that. To surrender control for a little while can be an unbelievably freeing experience.
The psychologist Roy Baumeister really nailed it when he said, these scenarios offer a temporary escape from this burden. It's exactly that, a vacation from the full-time job of being you. Okay, but it's not just about one single emotion, right? It's never that simple. This whole experience is more like a really complex emotional cocktail, with all these different, sometimes contradictory, ingredients mixed together. And one of the most important ingredients is a feeling called compersion. It's basically the polar opposite of jealousy. It's the joy you feel when you see someone you love experiencing pleasure, even if it's with someone else. And what's truly mind-bending is that you can feel intense jealousy and intense compersion at the exact same time. It's a wild mix. And then you add the act of watching into the mix, and things get even more intense. It creates this incredible feedback loop. The observer gets turned on by watching their partner, which makes the partner even more turned on because they know they're being watched. And that in turn makes the observer even more aroused. The energy just builds and builds on itself. Okay, last section. And this is a really important one. We have to talk about the huge gap that can exist between fantasy and reality. Because as fascinating as all this psychology is, putting it into practice comes with some serious complexities. Look, what sounds hot in your head doesn't always play out the same way in real life. And we have to be honest about the psychological risks here. Jealousy can go from being exciting to just plain overwhelming. If it's not handled carefully, it can damage self-esteem. And of course, it can put a massive strain on a relationship if that foundation of trust and communication isn't rock solid. And that's why, at the end of the day, the act itself isn't what's most important. It's the psychological infrastructure underneath it all. We're talking about absolute trust, open and honest communication, and clear, enthusiastic consent. Without that foundation, the whole thing falls apart. So when you step back and look at all this, what it really shows us is something much bigger. It's not just about this one niche interest. It's about the profound, almost unbelievable plasticity of human sexuality. It shows our incredible ability to take even our most difficult, painful emotions and transform them into sources of pleasure and deep connection. Which leaves us with one final big question to chew on. If our minds are capable of this kind of incredible emotional alchemy, literally turning pain into pleasure, what does that tell us about the very nature of human desire? Where do our own desires really come from? It's something to think about. Thanks for diving in with us today.